Good morning. Welcome to Lovebabz Lovetalk. It is Friday. I am late. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I throw myself on the sword of forgiveness. Good morning, Enroue.
Good morning, Babz.
So Enroue is back. So even before the popularity of the last time he was on, we had already decided that we were going to do this show. But people have been stopping me since you've been on to talk about how do we connect back to our Africanness, religious practices, or religious practice, or whatever we want to call it. So people have been like strong arming me about this conversation, running up on me.
That makes me curious.
Oh my God. So people are like, okay, so how do you do this? Like how do we connect back to our ancestors in a way that doesn't look like voodoo, that doesn't disrespect what we know about Jesus? And how do we make it all fit? I know that's a lot, right? This is Enroue Halfkenny, who is here with me today this morning, and we're going to be unpacking some of this religious practices.
Yeah. So,
he's like, Babz, I ain't come here for that this morning.
No, that is why I'm here. Because there's a lot of important layers in just what you said, and actually leading up to the music that was playing, right? So down at the crossroads, right, was playing.
Yes.
Right. And so in some ways I want to start there.
Okay.
Right. So, right, the crossroads in the traditions here is a place. So on one hand, it's a place of choice, but it's really this place like, oh, you go to the crossroads here, this person sold their soul to the devil to get something.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the story. That's the framework of it. And that's a specific framework, right? So in African traditions, in the Orisha tradition, the crossroad is a place that is governed by a divinity named Eshu. And Eshu, as a divinity, was turned into the concept, or was made to parallel the concept of the devil. Is not that. Is actually one of the divine forces you can work with and pray to, and honor. The complexity is that some people think of Eshu as a trickster divinity, but it's really when you get to that crossroad, you have to make a choice, and you're held accountable for that choice. And a lot of people don't like that.
Okay.
Right. And because that
they don't
accountability.
like it in Christianity either.
Right. But there was actually a specific way. Actually, I can't remember his name, but there was a Yoruba bishop who went back to West Africa among the Yoruba people and translated the Christian Bible into Yoruba and translated Eshu as a divinity as the devil. Right? So it actually was an explicit choice that was then made. Okay. So that's kind of one layer. The other layer is even what you said. So people strong arming you. How do we get back to our African roots? And it's not like voodoo. So that immediately says, so the place that even the word voodoo plays is disparaging, is about the devil, is about negativity, and it's actually not an understanding that this was a Vodun and voodoo are religious practices, some from Ghana. Vodou is from Ghana. Vodun is what was then kind of created in Haiti, which was the religion of the free African peoples there, or the enslaved African peoples who also became free, or those who escaped to get their independence, and actually is the national religion.
I did not know that.
And it's honored as that.
Okay.
So because of how we are taught in this country, really about our Africanness and about blackness, that is immediately disparaged. So even before we get into like how do we actually reconnect, is to actually unpack this understanding of how it's even framed.
I was thinking about that as I was driving in. And the question is, do we have to unpack some of this?
Yes.
Western, American indoctrination, and all of this before we can get to that? I was just thinking that when I was driving in, I was like, do we have to unpack all of that?
Yeah, but I don't think it's like we have to be done. right?
Okay.
If we think about like our own liberation as human beings, right? It's not like, oh, well, when I'm done, then I'll get to do X, Y, or Z, right? We can, but part of our increase in our consciousness and our own freedom is undoing the way we've internalized a negative view of ourselves, right? So that's internalized depression.
Okay.
Right. And so we've been taught. And so African peoples were kidnapped and brought to this side of the world. Our traditions were literally beaten out of us.
Yeah.
Depending on where we landed, right? It looks different in Brazil, in Haiti, in Cuba, around the Caribbean, and United States. There's a different intentionality on what was eliminated and what was allowed to stay.
Okay.
So here in this country, the way that slavery worked and the way that enslaved peoples were kind of allowed to practice, for example, the hand drum, except for the tambourine, was eliminated consciously. You're not allowed to. If we find that, there's trouble. That is not what happened in the Caribbean. And so if you look at what is the Africanized culture that still exists, that is a literature and technology that has still existed because of how African peoples were able to maintain a practice. So depending on where people landed, they were able to maintain one thing or another. So part of our own finding our way back, even internally, is about like, wow, what are the ways that like I've internalized that? And our culture has internalized that, and the trauma, the intergenerational trauma that's been a result of that around how we can even see ourselves as people.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, but like, what else is there to do in this life, right?
I like that. What else are we here? There to do?
Why else are we here?
Okay, so people can start there by acknowledging the internal oppression.
So there's internalized oppression, right? I can't see myself. I disparage myself. I disparage my people, those who look like me, those that have this tradition.
But people don't even know that they're doing it. Like they don't even know. You have to be able to recognize internal oppression. And it shows up in a lot of kinds of self-hatred kind of ways.
Yes. Yes. But I don't want to minimize, there is also externalized oppression, right?
Yeah.
Right? This isn't just, I got to just change how I feel and then everything unfolds in a magical way.
Because there's stuff out there that are all about your destruction.
Yeah.
And making you less.
And what institutions are allowed and what institutions are not allowed. What's justified, what's not justified, even as a practice. For example, there was some interesting how it plays out in legal ways. So as we're talking about religion, a practice of a religion. And so there's a range of what practices are in this tradition, in the Orisha tradition, and in other indigenous traditions. And many of those are kind of pathologized and demonized. And so if we look at something like animal sacrifice, right? So if we look at where animal sacrifice has played a part in the world and in virtually every religion, it's this being is offered to God or to the understanding of God or to the divinities, and very often is then those blessings are then shared by the community, right? So that animal is offered and then it's killed in a ritual way, and then that food is shared by the community to share those blessings. So that's halal, that's kosher, that's Leviticus, right? That's all of these things in ways that it's actually fundamental and folded into most religious practices.
Yes.
And
communion.
And communion, exactly. So how that then is pathologized in African practice, in voodoo, right?
Yes.
So what's interesting is when that's legally pathologized, so you have like either official or unofficial policy of how that is addressed, you actually have had people from other religious groups stand by traditional practitioners saying, no, we don't want you to make this illegal, because then you're going to look at our practices like, well, who's going to decide when communion is legal, when it's not? Whose framework are we going to use? And so you actually have a way that some religious institutions will stand by some of these indigenous practices because they see the risk to themselves, even as they may also be a part of demonizing these practices. But they see that line of like, well, we can't make it really illegal, because then who's going to come knocking? Who could come knocking on our door and tell us, well, you can't do this, you can't do that?
Wow, that's pretty profound.
Yeah.
That's big.
Yes. So these are the ways that it's externalized, right?
And so by the time it gets to African worship, it has become some other thing. It's not seen at the same. Yeah, I call a thing a thing.
I mean, that's and not by everybody, right? Because some people say like, "Oh, I see your practice. I see who you are." That doesn't fit in my understanding of it. Mm-hmm. But there's a kind of an unlearning that has to happen.
Yeah.
For many people.
Yeah. Wow, that is pretty powerful. So now we have these standing things over here that are accepted and are part of it and respected. Mm-hmm. And then you come over here to Africa and it's like, oh, devil worship, savage, low on the intellectual worship totem pole, that kind of thing. That's pretty powerful. So we have to overcome that. We have to elevate that thought before we can even get to the next level.
It's a part of it. So it's not like you got to be done with it.
I like the way you said that. You don't have to be done. You just keep
doing it, right? It doesn't mean you have to stand in one place. Say, well, when I'm totally free from any internalized or externalized thing, then I'll take a step. Otherwise, what would happen, right? But we have to take a step. We have to live into even our potential.
Yes.
Right? We have to move in that place.
We have to live into our potential.
Live into our potential.
Oh, I love that.
Because if we don't, and we're waiting for someone to say, okay, what's going to move?
Enroue, that thought, that concept applies everywhere in your life. You can fit that everywhere in your life, everywhere, in every instance, for every instance that fits. Wow.
So in the Orisha tradition, one element is about destiny, and so it's seen as kind of before we're born, we kind of choose our destiny, but then we have to do it. We have to do it. It's potential.
Well, I think Christianity has that in it too. There's no waiting for. There is the doing.
Look how similar those traditions are.
Yeah.
Not so different.
Not so different. Everybody's got a component.
Right. And there's literature and there's ritual and there's community. I mean, recently being at a funeral, Catholic funeral,
I was at that same funeral.
It was very powerful to see so many parallels. Oh, we're making these offerings to our notion of God.
Yeah.
Because that is not just what we need, but also what this person needs, what this community needs, even as they is passed. Right. So many elements. Wording is different, but it's the same, right? We make offerings to develop and strengthen a relationship with these forces.
Yes.
Right. I give to you, you give to me. We're sitting down to dinner, a different thing can happen. I'm taking time to be here. You're taking time to be here. We're making sacrifices and offerings so that our lives can move in a direction that's in line with our destiny and our purpose and meaning and health and well-being, etc.
That's powerful. And you are absolutely right. And I felt very holy in that space. Any house of worship, though, I feel, whether it's mine or not, I feel the connection of the universe. Always. Whether it's a mosque or a temple or, storefront church, I always feel holy in these places.
Some of the complexity is that knowing, so many people are seeking and practicing this connection to the divine. Not everybody does that, but I do, and I enjoy it, and that's a priority in my life, and many people do. And so like in a variety of sacred places, I can feel that and I can appreciate that. And it doesn't, though, eliminate the complexity of how institutions have landed on people, right? So how institutions of colonialism and imperialism have perpetuated suffering on earth-based peoples, on people who actually have a practice like mine or who look like me. And so it doesn't invalidate that or undo it, but it's a tension and it's a struggle.
And because you're in these spaces, you're not saying I co-sign the history of this, right? At least that's how I come at it. Like, because I'm in this Roman Catholic Church, I'm not down with the Roman Catholic philosophy and all all of that. I'm not co-signing that. But there is some sacredness that you can't ignore, right? Like, I don't know. Or can you? I don't know. People do, but
people do. I mean, people get into so one of the things that I think are really powerful, and I think in many traditions, but I'm talking about the Orisha tradition. That's my main practice. So in these traditions, there's an idea of flexibility and elasticity where it's like, oh, like I can honor you and your practice. That's not a threat to me. Actually, there's elements in the sacred literature, in the Orisha tradition that says, so we're doing this work together, right? We're doing this kind of spiritual reading. We're looking at what your purpose and your destiny is. And it actually doesn't lie with us. Actually, your purpose and your destiny is in this other spiritual and religious practice. That is embedded in the sacred literature of the Orisha tradition, and which is different from some of the Abrahamic, some of the kind of monotheistic who said like this is the one and the right way.
Yeah.
Right. And I think there's an interesting difference in that about what it means, about how we see other traditions. And there's flexibility in Christianity, and some people like, no, there's more and there's multiplicities, but there's also a piece around this is the right way, and I'm going to bring you into this right way. And the ways that it's been negatively done is that, and if you don't sign on, you will be destroyed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's real.
Yeah.
And in ways that, to get back to like African heritage people in this country, right? We landed here with a rich legacy and tradition, sacred literature, connection, food, community, all of these things, and and that was literally destroyed. That was beaten out of us, or explicit elements of it. I mean, that's what we have maintained, and that's why elements of what makes a black church the black church, what makes kind of blackness in this country is that connection, that's polyrhythmic levels of living and expressing ourselves.
Yeah. So even if it was beaten out of us, it was still in our veins. It's still in our DNA, right? Like it seemed to travel through the blood. Because black church is very different than anybody else's church. I don't care what denomination it is. It could be Kojic, and it could be a black church under the UCC. It all has that connection of similarity around music and tone and,
Yeah.
That's pretty powerful. So these threats, so we are, I would say that we are more connected to our African roots than we realize.
Yes.
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah. And it also doesn't mean so to get back to your point of like, how do people find their way? Right. So it doesn't mean a wholehearted rejection of one thing and say, oh, now I have to be this other practitioner, which I don't know anything about, or even people who are, who've left the church in some way and are really striving to integrate some of these elements really struggle because they've really internalized like, well, I've been taught and internalized that this is bad, like not to trust. So in some ways, not to trust a mystic experience, right? So many of these traditions are experiential mystic traditions. There is the sacred texts, there are practices, but it's really around your individual specific relationship with your ancestors and with these divine forces. As a priest, as an Ifa priest of this tradition, you don't have to go through me to connect to them. I'm just a specialist. Really. I mean, my relationship is deeper because of that kind of speciality. But it's like, and I may have mentioned this before, it's something I say a lot. It's like, well, anyone can learn how to fix a car, and at a certain point, you take it to the mechanic. Right, because they've got a garage, right?
And bigger tools,
and they've got bigger tools and a level of expertise that people just don't have because that's not your specialty,
right?
And so one of the differences is that this tradition is about your relationship to these forces, and so even when people say I want to do this other thing, there's an unlearning of like of the mistrust of themselves, for the sake of the expert,
good point,
right?
That's a good, because people they feel like they're betraying something, that somehow or other they're betraying Jesus or God or whatever.
Right.
And that's a tough thing.
That change is, there's complexity in that.
Yeah.
It's not easy. Any real change and transition of a shift in identity is hard. I mean, that's actually more of the work. I mean, people who are addicted to smoking cigarettes, you're physically over the addiction in 3 days, but it's the habit.
Yeah.
That's the hard thing, right? And I don't want to equate people who are Christian who are like addicted to cigarettes and got to find the kind of right way in here. But it's the shift, and that's why the undoing is hard. That's why the internalization is really challenging. And it's a different kind of work than like, oh, I see this thing outside of me that's causing a problem.
And people, I mean, I like the idea that people can add things. Like, you don't have to give up the parts that you like about what you've learned or what you grew up with. You don't have to throw it away. You can make it all work, I think.
Right. Yeah.
That's where I'm trying to move towards.
Make it work.
I'm trying to make it all.
But it's about people finding their way. It's not about me or someone else saying like, here's the stamp of authenticity. Right? I mean, that gets into a whole other thing around like tradition and authenticity, and you know, that's
our next show.
That's what orthodoxy is, right? But one kind of concrete thing, right? Because I think ideas are good, but I also hear from you and from other people there's a desire, like, what do I do?
Yeah.
Like, how do I do this?
How do I do this? How do I?
So a fundamental aspect of the Orisha tradition. So one, it's a nature-based system. The earth itself is an Orisha. It's a divine being. There's sacred rivers, sacred mountains. So like, get outside. Get outside, right? We actually, so here's a funny thing around, not funny, but around what's been internalizing and what colonization and these institutions have done to us. In general, many people of African descent, Black people in this country, fear going into nature. Not comfortable, don't like it, which, considering we come from people who honored, revered, lived in and with nature and the earth, right? The only reason that happened is because of the trauma of how we were tied to the land in this country. There's for one example of undoing that layer, you know, dear friend of mine, Leah Penniman, wrote a book, Farming While Black. And talks about healing from the trauma of our disconnection with the land and the earth, right? So that's through the lens of African diasporic spiritual traditions, legacy of farming, right? Kind of an undoing of that to reconnect. Brilliant piece. Let people go explore it. It's really wonderful. And so just getting out there and saying like, I belong on this earth. I'm a part of this mystery of this system that is actually what nourishes me.
That's like a prayer. That's prayer, right? Walking the earth.
That's what
I belong.
Yes.
I mean, like that.
This practice is about praying. We're praying to these divine forces, and we do that connected to the earth, right? Here's the sacred river. We go to the river. We make our prayers there, right? That feels different. That's a different energy than we go to a mountain. Then we go to this sacred tree. Then we go to this valley, right? This waterfall, right? It feels different because there's these different divine forces there. And so these practices that's where we go, and that's where we bring our prayers.
I like that. Oh, I'm going to get out.
Yes.
And that's a whole different vibe than like going to somebody's church. And don't get me wrong. This is not about anti-church. Right. It's not. I think I'm just trying to figure out a way to make it all work.
Yeah. And people can, some things work for some people and some not others. So that's one aspect, right? Just start doing that. Listen. I mean, so for me, being in nature, really as a part of my own kind of spiritual searching was a place that I could be. I didn't have to worry about who saw me, how they saw me, how I think they saw me, what I think they thought I was doing or not doing, or how I thought I was trying to do. I could sit or walk and like be there and be connected. And also really grew up knowing a lot of science. I actually wanted to be a biologist and then a marine biologist. So I understood kind of these systems, and I was like, this is super complex and integrated and interconnected, and I can just be here, right? So that actually started to open that up for me, right? So that was my experience. Not everybody has that, but like stretch in that way. The other piece is another fundamental part of Orisha practice and most earth-based practices are ancestor reverence, our ancestor worship. And people can have all kinds of initial thoughts and feelings about that, but it's something that we already are doing, right? You look at someone's, their mantle, right? They got all their ancestors laid out there, the candle lit, they're talking to them, right?
Remembering anniversaries.
Yeah, exactly. That's indigenous practices. We pour libations on the ground, right? You see people like, oh, so-and-so passed away, like people on the street, like they pour some liquor on the ground.
Pour some yak on the ground.
That's how we communicate with these forces.
Wow.
That's a part of the technology of spiritual ritual and practices, and it comes from somewhere.
Okay.
And what it means is that the relationship with our ancestors continues long after their bodies are not here.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's a lived experience, right?
Yes.
I don't have to actually convince anybody of that. They're like, well, yeah. But it's not publicly practiced. It's not acknowledged as actually a part of this larger foundation of the ways that we understand our lives, the way we understand our relationships with all these forces. And even in so I'm also a clinical social worker. I have a private practice here in New Haven. And sometimes working with people who've lost someone in their families, it's just about me giving them permission to talk to them.
Yes, I find that to be true too. As a spiritual director, I find that to be true. That they need the permission, because there's this whole notion of I don't want to look crazy. I don't want to.
I'm supposed to get over it.
I'm supposed to get over it, and I'm not over it. And people are looking at me like I should be over this, but I lost my mother, and it's painful, and I can't, you know. And where do I go with that?
Right. And so that is not an explicit practice in Christianity.
Yeah.
Right?
You go and
Go and set up this altar space, an honoring space, really what it is, and have a picture there and talk to them about what your day-to-day is, but also ask them for support. I mean, there's some really powerful instances where matriarchs, and it stands out in this way because it's happened multiple times. So a matriarch of the family, you know, carrying the burden of their family, feeling a lot of pressure, and I work with them and kind of invite them to, like, okay, so who's an elder, who's an ancestor, who you connect with? And they're like, well, you know, my grandmother so and so, or these aunties. And by helping them to talk to them and connect with them, two things happen. One, they have a lap to lay on.
Yes.
Right?
And
they get to rest.
Yes.
They get a place of comfort.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Healing, transformative, magical unto itself. The second thing, they have a peer group. They can access and connect with people in their own family who know their position. So they're not alone in that way either, right? So it's both like, oh, I get to, in this way of honoring my ancestors, honoring these other matriarchs, I'm not alone, right? I've got peers who understand the burden that I'm carrying, and I get to rest. There's a place I can feel support and feel held. And so that's a real way that the inviting that in, right? I'm not convincing people of it. I just walk them through, like, you know, that place in your heart. Breathe in there, connect in there, speak in there.
And that doesn't, because people will say, well, Jesus. But it's not saying that you can't take your burdens to Jesus. That's not it at all. You just like,
So ancestors, so even in this tradition, your work with your ancestors and work with the Orisha are different. Because your ancestors are your people. They used to be, right? They were human beings. They know the walk of, you got this job, you didn't get this job. This person loves you, this person hates you, right? All of these things, they know that struggle, and they have your specific interests at heart. You know, it's like when you see a little child, you know, who falls down, you're just like, oh, I just want you to be okay, right? Or, you know, a young person is like, I can't believe all these things are happening. And you're like, I know. And in your mind's like, this will pass. It's going to be okay. I just want you to be all right. That's how our ancestors see us. They're just like, I know this feels like the end of the world, and you're dealing with all these things, and it's hard, and I just want things to be okay. So just like, let's be together.
And that was the whole theme in Wakanda, Black Panther, right? He'd go and talk to the ancestors.
So where do you think they got that notion from?
I know. Look at that.
Because this is what people do.
Yes.
It's not done over way back forever ago, and we just have to muddy our way through.
We already do it.
It's happening. These are practices that have been going on and are alive and have undergone and through the institution of slavery, colonialism in Africa, and not just African practices, but these are earth-based indigenous practices that still exist and that people are still living with, and that are also still explicitly under assault.
Wow.
So that's all. I mean, that's that's an aspect of that complexity. But for people to just start off, like, start where you are. Who was the person that you felt connected to? And here's another thing. People also get caught up in, well, what if I don't know their name? What if I don't have the person in my family who I'm like, oh yes, I want to be connected with them. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
Open your heart. Let yourself have a yearning for that connection. And it's like a call that goes out.
Mm-hmm.
And you can call out for them. Like, I'm just inviting those who can come and give me the love and support I need.
And even so many of us, I would say the majority of us are you know, we were enslaved people. So we've been cut off from our direct ancestors. Like, I don't know where my original peoples came from. Like, I can't say Ghana or, I mean, I could say Ghana, but I don't really, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Right.
And so, but I like the idea of saying, even though I don't know ancestors where y'all hail from, I want to be open to your spirits.
Right. That's us going to them. They're there.
Mm-hmm.
They're there.
Mm-hmm.
And they're waiting for us to just say, hey, I want you. I want this relationship. I don't know what it is. I don't know what's going to mean, but this is a part of me living. So it's not about, let me go back to this idea of an ancient way of living. There's a poem, or kind of interpretation of a poem, Basho, the Japanese poet, that says, don't walk in the footsteps of your ancestors, but seek what they sought.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So my practice is not about, let me try to do this idea of this kind of ancient authentic thing and live in this kind of ancient authentic way. It's like, oh, here are some tools that they used to access this thing which has meaning. And I don't know what it is. I mean, life is a mystery, right? This is like there's some
it is the ultimate mystery.
Right. There's some connection that I feel in these, and that this tradition has helped me to get closer to that.
Okay.
And so these are tools for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so as long as that works, let me see what that means in my life now.
I like that.
Right.
That's Enroue. That is damn good. I feel like I feel like I'm learning. I feel like I'm I love this idea of this connection to the earth. And I think that is a wonderful gift to tell people, step outside. And then when you're outside, shut up and listen.
So do you outside?
I am outside all the time.
Yeah,
I love being outside. I love parks. My favorite park is the city Rose Garden. It's my favorite space because it's so pretty there. I like East Rock. I just discovered Lake Whitney. No, is that what it is? Lake Whitney?
Yes. Wintergreen?
Yes, Lake Wintergreen.
Yep.
I just discovered that. I've never been there. My daughter brought me there because she was having a challenging day, and she was like, "Can we just go there?" And it's not too. It's like around the corner from her dad's house. So we didn't walk it. We just parked and went right to the beginning of the lake, and it was so serene. It felt very holy. So I'm outside a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like being outside. The beach is my favorite place. I'm on the beach just about every morning, like 5 o'clock.
That's powerful.
It is. Now I don't like to sail. Like, sailing is not my thing, but to be on the shore where the water meets the sand, I think that's so divine. I love it.
So there's an Orisha.
Oh,
just to say,
okay. All right.
Olokun,
is
the name of an Orisha. That's the ocean.
Really?
Yes.
So she is calling me.
Right. I mean, and again, there's a name. There's actually songs and literature and all kinds of things, sacred literature around Olokun, around the ocean. But it's the feeling, right? It's that feeling of like, oh, there's some peace that happens. There's some opening. There's some perspective, right? We get lost. I know for me, like, I can get lost in the day-to-day and the story of, and then like going to these places, like life is really big. It's big. And it can hold me. Yes. Right?
Yes.
I can be held by these. And that's a part of that relation. Like, you are developing these relationships with these places.
Yes.
And the energies that are there, the forces that are there for ease and for comfort and for healing and for openness and for inspiration. I mean, for all the things, and even things I don't even know about, right?
When I was studying to be a spiritual director, and I was learning about prayer, I mean, I always prayed, but I would be editing my prayers because I felt like there were so many people in the world. I don't want to pray for too much. Right?
Like it's finite.
Yeah. And so
it's the prayer pie that like you only get so much.
Then I learned. So then one of the nuns were like, Babz, God is big.
Right.
God is really big, and he can take all your prayers.
Mm-hmm.
Just pray them all up.
Yeah.
He's like, you're not taking away from some mother in the Sudan who needs food and shelter. Your prayer is not knocking her prayer out of the box.
Right.
There's enough space. God has enough room for your prayer. Mm-hmm. And it took me a while to sort of accept that. And what I was doing was I was putting boundaries on God's bigness, my own boundaries. God's like, girl, I'm big.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yes.
So do you recognize the types of prayers that you were bound? So I have an idea in my head that like very typically we can say, well, I'm going to pray for other people, right? And then these people and their stuff, but I'll leave myself out. So I'm curious if like if that happened, if that was where they're like, I don't want to ask for too much. If it was in that, or if it was something.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
Right.
It was
like you couldn't be included in it.
Right.
You can pray for everybody else.
I pray for everybody
Can't
else,
pray for yourself.
But I want to pray for myself because because in my mind, I was feeling selfish. Like, how dare I go to God with my smallness and these small things that I want, where there was people who were having real suffering. See, more suffering.
Oh, because you weren't really suffering.
Right, because I wasn't really. They had more bona fide suffering.
We got the suffering scale. Right? Where am I located on that? Like, oh, now I can pray for me.
Now I can pray
right now. Now I got the one little extra suffering, so now I can be included in that.
And so I was, so I felt some kind of way about that, and I was like, I was really trying to be more about the work of service rather than my own healing. So it took a lot of shifting to sort of say, if you can't pray for yourself, who can? You know?
Yeah. Yes.
And you can ask for what you want. And I'm not talking things, right? Like, I'm not talking, like, I wasn't praying for a car or anything, but just,
You're healing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And once I figured out, once I just got turned around, and once I turned around, I was like, you mean I could have been
all this time? I could have been praying for my healing.
And God was probably sitting there like, girl, I've been waiting for you to get this.
Right. So in that way, even to tease us back into like ancestor stuff, like they're waiting for us. Like they're patient. I mean, they're not going anywhere, right? Yeah. And they're just like, well, when you see us and you want this, fine, we're here. And it's just to me, it's another layer of what that healing can be, because it's also, we have so much to heal from our relationships with ourselves and our family, right? And so these are ways to do that, right? It's not over and done with. We still get to work like this thing. I mean, there was a time I was so mad at my grandfather, my father's father. He died before I got into the practice. But there's this like history of alcohol abuse and kind of ways that he couldn't really be present with my dad, and all these stories, right? And I mean, some was real, but like there was an element that was really angry around that. I was like, well, I honor you. I'm mad. And so I would like write letters. I just write these angry letters and like put it on my altar and just be like, I need to work. There's something I need to work out in this relationship. Yeah. I don't feel that way now, right? And it's how we work on all our, it's how we can work on any relationship, right? We don't always choose to how do we work out the challenges because we want to be close, right? Many times we want to be close and something happens, we're like, I'm going to push away. But like, how do we stay in that intimacy? Because the healing, right? And then the benefit of that love and that connection is actually more important. It's hard to do. Oh, but but this is a place, like ancestor work is a place where we get to do that. And we get, and it's not a show, right? It's like in our hearts, this intimate place, and like how honest can we be? And how honest can we really look at not just the big picture, like I'm suffering, this white supremacy, but like, oh, here's this person who was abusing this other person who then caused pain to me. How do I work on that? Right? That's different.
That's real personal.
That's real personal.
That's right in your everyday practical life.
Right?
Yes.
So that's the thing. In your home, there's your people, here's your altar, here's your prayers, here's your offering. Work it.
Yes.
And healing and to me, not just like healing, oh, I feel better, but it helps me to actually be connected to and inherit these blessings and gifts.
Yeah. I think people are rooted in fix. I have to fix this to a plausible end, right? And
quick. What's the thing I do to make this change?
Yes. And sometimes you can't. Sometimes, as a spiritual director, I tell people sometimes you have to wrestle with a thing for some time. Wrestle in the sense that you don't let it control you, but you can put it down and pick it up and take it into a contemplative place for a period of time, and then put it down, put it on your altar, and then come back to it when you have mind to wrestle with it a little bit more.
Yes,
you know what I mean. So instead of carrying all these things,
right?
It's a spiritual work and the work that you do. It's a muscle. The more you do it, the better you get.
That's what we talk about spiritual practices.
Yes.
Right. You don't just get on a bike. I mean, even in terms of walking, right? So human beings, we weren't born walking. We had to learn how to walk, right? And those first attempts, right?
Yes.
We couldn't even keep our head up, right? And so it's the same. It's a practice. It's the doing of it, right? We can be aware of all kinds of things. We can read things. We can have these notions which help, but then it's the doing. It's the practice. It's the day. It's the day to day. It's like, okay, I'm going to go back. I'm going to try to pick this thing up again and see if I can hold it differently and look at it differently and relate to it differently. Like, not quite yet. Put it back down. Then come back to it another time.
Yeah.
And to trust our capacity.
Yes.
The ways that I think to be open to our own healing and transformation. So sometimes in the midst of trauma and hardship, we don't have the capacity because to survive, we got to like shut these things down and move through or whatever. But to understand that sometimes shifting happens in our life and then we actually have the capacity. And so we have to catch up with that.
Yes.
And say, I'm going to trust that, like, ooh, maybe I can look at that picture now and I couldn't look at it before. And
that's having worked with women and men too who have been raped. They don't have sometimes they don't have the capacity to deal with it at that moment. Sometimes it takes people years to sort of unpack what has happened to them.
Yeah.
And so when people sort of say, why didn't they tell immediately? Because they didn't have the capacity to sort of acknowledge that this thing happened to them because it's so traumatic.
Right. Well, so specifically with like sexual violence, the other piece is that we actually don't live in a system that's supportive.
Right.
So that would also be different.
Right.
Right. People would actually have more capacity if they felt like if I said something, this would move in a healing and a justice way.
Yeah.
So,
but it doesn't.
So when like
you get reabused.
Exactly. Right. You're like, I don't believe it. What did you do?
Yeah. What were you wearing?
Exactly. And
what were you drinking?
That's real. And so that's an element of like, these are, nothing is kind of lives in just one place. Right. So this kind of undoing like the trauma of that, it doesn't just live like inside a person. Right. Well, how does the community around them support their healing and liberation, or how does it continue to stifle them and even oppress them, or even to replicate it and to continue that? And so these are all these levels of kind of where that needs to be addressed.
I like that whole capacity thing. I think that makes sense, and I think it makes sense for just about every place in your life. I mean, of course, there are some things that you have to absolutely act on, right? If your house is on fire, you gotta get out. Okay.
Yeah.
But there are other areas in your life where you don't have to deal with things immediately. You can unpack them at a later time.
Right. I think if we, and part of that capacity is sometimes we've packed something away and we forget.
Yes.
And that's okay.
Okay.
And then we have the capacity. Well, then it starts to bubble up. And so sometimes it's bubbling up because we have a different capacity.
Yeah.
And instead of like, I really got to push it down. It's like, maybe I can be curious about it. And so for me, these practices and these traditions give me tools to deal with these things differently. So I actually don't have to do it all by myself.
Okay.
And that's the same really as other spiritual and religious practices, right? We're not alone.
And that's always the underlying message.
Right.
You are never alone.
You're not alone. You don't have to have it all figured out. It's like when I talk to people about praying, it's like, well, what if I don't know what to say? Okay, so pray for having an idea about what to say. But I'm afraid. Okay, so pray not to be afraid. Like, just keep going back in there. Great. You don't have to have it all figured out.
I like that.
It's like, okay, where are you at? I don't know, I'm nervous. Okay, so just like pray, like I'm really just start saying that. I'm really nervous. I don't know what to do. I'm like looking for something. I don't even know what it is. Like I didn't grow up praying. I literally remember the first time I was like, so there's something, and the only frame I had was like, I guess like I get on my knees and like do the like prayer thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know who I'm praying to. I don't know what and there's something. I'm hoping there's something, but like I can't do this by myself. And I don't even remember I can see it. I don't know exactly what I said, but I was like, wow, like you start where you can start.
Yeah.
And I just, that was that place of like, I'm not gonna pretend that I'm alone, because like I don't actually feel that. Like there is something else, but I don't know where it is. I don't know what it is. I don't know how to connect with it.
Yeah. And
then I began to learn. And so these were practices and a tradition. So, one thing I wanted to say is, so for me, it was really important to engage in a tradition. Mm-hmm. I'm not the first human being to say, I'm having this experience of the divine being in nature, but I don't know what it is. I'm having these spiritual experiences, these mystical experiences. I don't have language for it. I know I'm not crazy, but I don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. Right? I'm not the first human being that this is happening to. There's got to be traditions and things. And it was also important for me to find that so that I knew the difference between me just making something up. Right? So the kind of New Age movement, this is like in the early 90s, kind of shamanism and workshops were happening. Like, what are these earth-based experiential traditions? That I kind of knew to orient around. But again, like that as a community felt really problematic to me. And there were things around appropriation and things around kind of consumerism that was happening, which still exists today. Mm-hmm. And it was important for me to say, I really won't know, because I'm smart. I won't really know if I'm just making this up to like feel good. Mm. And for me, part of the tradition, part of anchoring in a tradition was also something I think I learned this in it, but I could surrender to and be guided by. Yeah. Otherwise, it's like, oh, what do I have to do here? And what do I have to do there? And I'll hold this and I'll shake this and I'll burn this and I'll sit with this. And like, oh, so this is a lineage. How do I do this? Oh, here's the language. Here's the technology. This is the way we do it. Oh, okay. Let me do that. And ooh, this is working. This is guiding me in a way that not just feels good, but where like there are these outcomes and there's a trust and a reliance in there and a joining in a relationship. So this isn't just like I'm just kind of blindly following, but it's like it's a back and forth. Well, I think this, and is this working? Or I'm kind of moving over here, or like I want these things in my life, or can I pray for me and the community, and kind of the layers of complexity, but also real concrete decisions. Like, okay, I met this wonderful woman and I'm apprenticing in this spiritual house at the time. This is when I met Tegan. And literally I was like, well, let me do a reading in this tradition to see if this is a person I should date and focus on. Had I gotten a no, I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have continued.
Wow.
And I got a yes. So I was like, okay, this is my tradition. This is what I'm practicing. This is what's guiding me to find meaning and purpose in my life. And that was the like kind of intense edge that I was on. Like, if I'm here, I'm going to be here. Yeah. I don't know what it means, but that's the lens that I'm working on. And so things were really, the kind of yes or no. So again, being at the crossroads. Is it best for me to go left or right? I can't trust myself. My instincts got me in a pit of despair. I can't trust myself. Orisha, ancestors, help me.
Yes.
Do I go left or right?
I need some guidance.
It's best for you to go right. Okay, I'm going to go right. Mm-hmm. Instead of like, but left is still looking good. Yeah. Maybe I'll try a little left first, right? That has its own consequences. And that's actually the place where Eshu says like, okay, go left. See what happens. I'm going to be right here. You're going to come to another crossroads, right? And you can go back to the right at some other time, but know that this is what the left is going to do. Yeah. And so it's getting guidance, getting support. It's not just, I have these things and then I just figure it all out by myself, because we don't know. We don't know what our full destinies and potentials are, right? We have the moment, and how in this moment do I move closer to that? Yeah. That wholeness. I like that.
All right. When you come back, you have to come back.
Yes.
Because we look at us. We run out of time. You have to come back. So
Thank you so much.
Listen,
we'll
all y'all burning up my phones and all this. He'll be back.
Oh, so let me say this. So my practice is healing and liberation counseling.
Yes.
You can go to healingandliberation.com. There's some info there. If people have questions, feel free to reach out to me. My number, email address are on that site. I'm open. I mean, I was trained in a way that's really about sharing information and helping people to have a practice. I love sharing this because it's been a real blessing for me. So I'm in a place to do that.
Well, I'm so glad. I've enjoyed you. I enjoy you. And it gives me my spiritual it allows me to put on my spiritual direction hat in a very public space.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Because we don't run around talking about what we believe in our day. So this is a nice way for me to sort of do that in my day, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you.
So thank you.
Yes.
All right, Harry, I'm gonna play me out, I think, at some point. Let me oh, is he clicking me on? Just play something.
Thanks, Babz.
Thank you, Enroue. I'll see you soon.
We'll keep trying.